Okay, high heels and a stage. Hello. So we're here to talk about the social media. And one of the things that I really like about the social media, and I think you'll all agree with me, is that it's a communication platform. And it's a very unique communication platform because we're able to immediately see how our message is received. So it's beautiful. Another beautiful thing about the social media is that you can communicate from one space with millions of people in one day. So there are a few things that I'd like to dispel about Israel advocacy and the social networks. There is nothing magical about succeeding in the social networks. It has absolutely nothing to do with luck. Again, it's a system. It's a system that all you need to do is plug a particular peg into, and then you need to take care of your peg, make sure you give it enough water, enough food, watch it grow, and it produces results. It's all predictable, in other words. So, before we start, I wanted to talk about some of the things that are possible with the social media. And the best way to do that is by giving some examples. For those of us in the network, it was pretty clear before May 15th of this year that May 15th was going to be a very daunting time for Israel in the network. The anti-Israel chatter was beginning to grow, and the message was very specific and very clear. The message was doubting Israel's right to exist under any borders, period. So clearly we needed to come up with a response for this. And again, we have a window of opportunity of about 10 seconds that, as the previous speaker mentioned, we don't actually have time for the whole movie in the social network. We do need to use 10 seconds very efficiently if you're on Twitter, and 20 seconds very efficiently in Facebook in order to actually reach your audience. So what we did for Nakba is we prepared 65 talking points, and by utilizing the social network that we have developed since last October, those 65 talking points propagated through the social networks, and within 24 hours they reached close to 3 million people. We were pretty happy with that. In this particular instance, what we found is, and again, going back to the previous presentation about the audience, this was a campaign that was particularly successful with the people that are already pro-Israel supporters. They saw what was going on in the networks. They wanted the tools to respond. So our job as leaders of advocacy organizations on behalf of Israel is to figure out what these messages are. What can they use? What can they take and distribute with them? So, a more recent success that talks about the things we can do with the social networks. We're all aware, we've all been watching what's happening in Israel right now. There's a big social revolution. People are out in the street demanding change. It was pretty impossible not to be moved by the fact that 300 people are out in the streets, and out of them only 7 were detained. It's a huge story. It's a huge story, especially now, because the listening of the audience in the social network, they're hearing about Syria. They're hearing about revolutions. It all involves a lot of violence. And even if you're not listening to violence, even if you're listening to the Middle East, even if you just happen to live in LA, and even if you just experienced the immigration demonstrations that we had here a couple of years ago, we didn't have anywhere near 300,000 people. The numbers I recall are we had about 50,000 people on the street and close to 200 arrests. So the fact that you have a country that can send 300,000 angry people out to the street to demonstrate and demand change, and in the entire nation only 7 people are arrested, is a big story. So we put out the following tweet. And in less than 24 hours, this tweet was viewed by close to 500,000 people. Now, when it comes to messaging, this is also one of our favorites because it's proactive. Okay? It didn't have anything to do with crisis. You will notice that there is nothing negative that we said about Syria. There's nothing negative that we said about anyone. It was just a way to highlight what Israel is and do it in a way that is authentic. When we check the demographics, this particular message was actually propagated by an audience that is way outside of the general pro-Israel community. I'm not saying we didn't have the support of the pro-Israel community, but it was very successful with people who are political activists who usually have nothing to do with Israel. They usually deal with the fights of Democrats, Republicans, or they're fighting for the freedom of Syria, or they're fighting for the freedom of Egypt. So for us, it's a pretty decent demonstration of why the social networks are so exciting. Okay. Why did we start Act for Israel? Why am I here talking about the social networks? And by the way, I'm not the only founder of Act for Israel. We're a pretty good, dedicated group of people, none of whom came from the advocacy world. And we're doing this because we really believe that Israel is in a new war front. We're in a serious war front. And in this war, we're lagging behind. We're dealing with a very organized network of tens of thousands of anti-Israel activists who are working daily to disseminate messages. And the messages don't only have to do with a perspective or information, it's a lot of quick, 140 characters, messages of misinformation and delegitimization. So they were talking about 25-cent coffee cups before, which I don't remember, but I do remember this. In the early 90s, and those of you who are old enough to remember this with me, we all watched with a little bit of amazing as the anti-Israel voices started to show an incredible ability to use the traditional media. And they did this through a very disciplined and effective perception campaign. And the result was very good. Very quickly, Israel transformed in the public perception eye from a small country that is brave, that is busy protecting its borders against all odds, and very quickly became the Goliath who's using its might to oppress the weak. So the same thing is happening right now in the social networks. We don't have a lot of time to get into the details of the anti-Israel network, but it's an organized network. One of their advantages, and that I suggest that we could all benefit from emulating ourselves, is that they work very, very, very well together. On the social networks, I don't just want to say Palestinian because it's more than the Palestinian, they're all willing to put politics aside and work together to get the anti-Israel message across the border. Okay, and why does it matter? It matters because America's future leaders are on the social networks. 87% of Americans under the age of 30 get all their news and information from the social networks and the email. So clearly, this is where Israel needs to be. This is where our voice needs to be. Otherwise, it's going to be another case in which the story and the narrative is going to be framed by our enemies. And what does it mean? How much success are they having? Well, it's pretty dire. We're not doing really, really well. There are a few issues with tracking sentiment on the internet. We can get into it some other time, but the numbers are pretty consistent. On the social networks, we have a situation in which we have roughly 17%, the numbers go from 17 to 20%, who will have pro-Israel messages, and the rest, which is the overwhelming majority, is very busy putting out anti-Israel messages. At this point, I'm hoping you're all sitting at the edge of your seat thinking, what can I do? Okay, so if you haven't already done so, please jump into the networks. Notice we picked a picture with a parachute, so you know you're going to be safe. It's going to be a safe landing. There are a few things to remember in the social networks. If you head an organization that has a presence in the social networks, don't be paralyzed by fear. The biggest advantage of the social network is that there's a very short attention span, there is a very short memory for your audience. So if you do make a mistake, in our experience, own it, correct it. You're going to have interns, you're going to have employees, and quite frankly, I humbly admit that you can be the one sitting and working the social media stream, and you will make mistakes. Everyone is human. At some point, you respond to your emotion, and you respond in a way that goes outside the messaging intent of your organization. Correct it right away and go right back to it. It's amazing. It's very quickly forgotten in the social media. Okay, but before you go in, and if you want to reach success, as in any other business venture, plan. Identify your goals. What do you want to do with the social media? Do you just want to open a Twitter account and a Facebook page? That's fine. But if that's your only goal, that's fine. If you want to achieve something else, think about it, address it, and plan for it. A lot of times with organizations, and this is something that should be brought into consideration, is that the process of adopting the social network strategy needs to be an organization-wide decision. All of a sudden, because the social networks are both a mirror, okay, and they're also a communication tool. So there's a lot that people are going to see about you and your organization through the social network. It requires, all of a sudden, the type of openness that some organizations might not be comfortable with. So deciding those issues in advance, also deciding if all the people that are working for your organization are not going to be a part of your social media team, which actually increases your reach by quite a bit, but you do have to give up some control. Okay, remember that the social media is there to serve you, not the other way around. Technology, we're not slaves. Technology is here to serve us. So again, define the objectives and only then come up with a tactical plan. Remember that anything is possible on the internet. That includes the social media. Anything is possible. You want to reach 1 million people, a decent internet marketer can write a plan for you and have you reach 1 million people. It's all going to cost money. So it doesn't happen by magic. And the story of viral, while it's good and it happens, is not something that I would write a business plan on because you can't predict it. On the other hand, be aware that even a modest plan can help smaller organizations become very effective advocates for their audience. They can become very effective advocates for Israel with a new audience. And an added benefit for these organizations is as they advocate for Israel and make their voice be heard with a new audience, the added benefit is that they might be able to receive some new members and potential donors. So, we don't have a lot of time to get into detailed social media strategy for organizations, but there are a few basic building blocks to consider. Find your voice. The more authentic you are, the more success you will have. Define your audience, know your goals, which we talked about, and track your results. Find your voice is an interesting story because it takes all the messaging and the branding that we talked about today up until this point, but then it throws a new challenge for an organization that wants to speak through the social networks. And that challenge is authenticity. Very important to be authentic in the social networks. Otherwise, people can just follow the major newspapers. They don't have to follow you if they just want to get the headlines. Okay? So take everything that you've learned from your communication, take everything from your advocacy plan, and decide what your voice is going to sound like. Keep it human. That's the most important thing. Okay, so as we're speaking, we need to define our audience, right? It's not enough, do I want to get 500 new Twitter followers who are very active, who are Christians who are supporting Israel? Do I want to reach the center, or would I like to reach the liberals? Okay, who is my audience? Who do I want to talk to? Where are they? And what are they interested in when they're not interested in Israel? Now, there's no need to get into very expensive plans. Most organizations can use their already existing resources to understand who their audience is. Take the database of your supporters, and if you don't have a clear understanding of who they are, ask questions. Ask them to participate in the survey. Find out what their political affiliations are. How far can you go? What can you say without losing them? How much room do you have to maneuver as you set out your message on Twitter or on Facebook? Okay, so most organizations go into the Facebook and the social media to advocate for Israel because they're interested in the topic of, well, building awareness. So let's say you're interested in taking care of, talking about right of return. That's a good subject. Okay, plenty of pro-Israel advocacy groups care deeply about the topic of the right of return. It's important to remember that that has to be built into our social media plan. If as an organization you decide that you care about educating, informing, and talking about the right of return, you're going to have to build in regular times for it. You're going to have to set up a system in which you constantly look for fresh interesting information. You're going to have to constantly track the results of the messages that you're putting out, and you're going to have to make sure and take the time to listen to the discussion about your topic, in this case, the right of return. What are people talking about right now? Okay, so when you come up with your social media strategy or how to improve your success with the social media, consider the time that will have to go into it if you'd like to be successful with a particular message. And again, the key here is to be realistic. For us at Act for Israel, we spend, this is our focus, this is our mission. So we spend our entire time dealing with the social networks. That's the only thing we care about. A typical organization will have a million other things that they need to do. They have their current programs, they have to take care of their audience, they don't have time to sit and be with the social media 24/7. So be realistic when you prepare your organization to delve into the social network. Be realistic with your goals. And again, the idea is to align it with your advocacy objectives. Every organization has their advocacy plan. Take it out of the drawer, take a look at it, and see how the social media can expand and enhance your advocacy objectives, not the other way around. So in other words, you don't want to take the social media and build it a new system into it. You want to take the tools and figure out how to expand your own success. Okay, remember that goals and targets are two very different things. After you set your definite goals, decide on some specific targets. I use some very basic and general targets, since it would be impossible for me to know which targets each organization would like to obtain. But for example, you can decide on the overall community growth. You're putting out a YouTube video, you can decide on how many new viewers you'd like to see. You can make some Twitter, Facebook, or you can also switch the thinking and start to think about how many new visitors come to your site from the social networks. Okay, now tracking is very important, and again, that's one of the biggest and the biggest advantages and the funnest thing about the social networks and about internet marketing in particular. Okay? You put something out there and you're able to track it right away. So I've included some things, common things that people like to track, usually when they track their social media initiative. For example, a lot of people like to track new Twitter followers. If you ask me, I happen to believe that that's kind of a useless activity. I'm not really interested in a big number of Twitter followers. We can all go and pay a service $100 and obtain a whole bunch of Twitter followers, right? What I want to do is to be able to have a smaller pool of very active and very engaged followers. And what I want to make sure is that those followers have the ability to take the messages that I put out, deliver it to their network, examine their network, and make sure that their network is actually attentive to them, so that I know that the message has a decent chance of moving forward. So my personal preference is to look at technology, tracking technology that will enable you to track your influence score and your impact score. And those programs usually go across the board on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and the major social networks. Another good thing is that they're not very expensive, so. But really, buy the tracking technology based on your organization's goals. I gave you my specific goals, but this is one really good thing for all pro-Israel organizations, because it really breaks the paradigm of the old behavior and the things that we're used to. In order to really be successful on the networks, there has to be an element of sharing and supporting. I'd like to take you back to the beginning and remind you that one of the reasons that the anti-Israel voice is so successful, one of the reasons that they're able to get their message to millions and millions of Americans, is because they work so well together. They work to deliver their message very well together. So, you know, the social networks has the component of social in it. People expect to see organizations support other organizations. It's the nature of the machine, it's the nature of the interaction. They expect to see you engage with other pro-Israel organizations, they expect to see you engage with your followers, and they expect to see you being supported by other pro-Israel organizations as well. there's another thing to consider, which is that the social networks are really, they're a content machine. And unless you plan to take 10 people and put them in the room and write fresh content all day long, you can't do this by yourself. So you might have to sit down and actually identify the other pro-Israel organizations that you can resonate with their message and you wish to support, but I strongly encourage you to do it. And you will find that it's being reciprocated quite often. At the end of the day, it's what helps Israel get its message across. And that's what we're looking for in the social networks. The platform has to do with what do I use, okay? Do I focus on Facebook? Do I focus on Twitter? Do I focus on YouTube? I have all these options. Where do I want to be? I only have a limited time. I have limited resources. Where am I going with this? And the answer is really, really simple. If you have the best results from Twitter, stick with Twitter. If your audience is on Facebook, they're not going to go to Twitter to follow you. Well, likely they won't. Focus on Facebook. Wherever you experience the most success or wherever your message resonates, stay focused there. And finally, the best thing to remember is that to succeed in the social networks, you don't have to be Einstein and you don't have to be a brain surgeon. You just have to pay attention. You have to be willing to commit. You have to learn how the machine works, so you learn how to operate it. And you just have to jump in.